This is a Parshat Podcast brought to you by Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study, and I'm your host, Yosefa Fogel-Rubel. Let's learn. Welcome back to the Matan Podcast, where this year we're exploring the weekly Haftorah portion. Be in touch with us to sponsor an episode of Vayikra at podcast@matan.org.il or the Matan office. It's a really special way to mark occasions, and we will be honored to serve as a platform for your milestones and memories. This is your last chance to sign up for the Matan Kitfuni conference to be held on March 8th in New York City at the Lincoln Square Synagogue, titled Telling the Story, Writing, Teaching, Sharing Our Legacy. As you hear this episode, I am likely already in the States gearing up to meet you. This conference will both serve as a book launch for the 3 Kitfuni books published in English and Pesach preparation. Register right now on the Matan website. It's going to be a phenomenal day with moving programming and an uplifting setting. Parshat Tisa opens with the census tax, the machatzita shekel, and instructions for a few additional accoutrements of the Mishkan. But all of the planning for a holy space comes crashing down when the people violate basic principles of the covenant in Moshe's absence. We sense this was all an overshoot for this newly freed people, utterly too fast and too lofty. The episode is familiar: the calf's construction, God's anger, Moshe's successful plea that God keep them alive, Moshe's confrontation with Aaron and his anger at the people, which translates into a killing spree of the sinners. Moshe and God's relationship also undergoes transition. Moshe is singled out as having a unique relationship with God. Later in the Parsha, we learn that he begins to emanate a divine light that had to be mollified when he spoke with the people. It seems that as the people lose some of their covenantal status, Moshe gains even more. The last section of the Parsha focuses on repair, reestablishing the terms of their covenant by reiterating the prohibition of apostasy, commandment of the holidays, and an emphasis on correct worship of God. This Shabbat is Parshat Para, the third of the 4 special Parshiot leading up to Pesach. We add the reading of the Para Duma procedure from Parshat Chukat, which is from the book of Bamidbar, and that is our maftir. As such, the Haftorah, Yechezkel 36, Lamed Vav, is also connected to Parshat Para. We will explore its connection to the Para Duma in today's conversation. This chapter in Yechezkel stands at the turning point between judgment and restoration. The book moves from prophecies of doom against Yehuda, chapters 1 through 24, and then there are oracles against the nations, chapter 25 through 32, and then after the fall of Yerushalayim is conveyed to Yechezkel by a palit, by a refugee, we move to visions of national renewal, which is chapters 33 through 48, the end of the book. Our chapter is part of this third section, the chapters of Tkuma. The one after ours we already spoke about in the episode with Rabbanit Shani Tarragon about the vision of the dry bones and the symbolic joining of the 2 staffs. Positioned here, the chapter reassures a shattered community that exile is not the end of the covenantal story, but merely a prelude to recreation, preparing the way for the climactic temple vision in chapters 40 through 48. I am thrilled to welcome back to the podcast Michal Porat, who teaches Torah at Machon Ma'ayan and Midreshet Moriah and for Torah in Motion. She's on the administration of Camp Hask and guides adult and student groups in Poland. Michal, it's a pleasure to have you back.
It's great to be back here. Thank you.
We spoke a long time ago. I was even trying to find your episode. I think it was 2 years ago. We spoke about Sarai Menu in the book of Bereshit, and today we're in for a very different kind of adventure in the book of Yechezkel, which yes. I've had the pleasure to hang out a lot with, apparently, in all these Haftorot. A lot of them are because they're switched and swapped for Yechezkel because of the special Parshiot.
You've had pleasure. This is the first one I've delved into. It's quite a story.
Exactly. So I just want to orient all of our listeners to what we're going to be doing today. It's a long-ish chapter, and it really is often divided into 2 parts. And these 2 parts also relate to the way that the Ashkenazi and Temani versus the Sephardi readings, how they look at this chapter. We read the entire chapter of 36, but the Sephardi communities read only the second half, which is verses 16 to 36. It's sort of undoubtedly a little bit more of a positive part of the parak, but we really have these 2 parts of it. And as I said, this is a parak that is, we'll talk really about the specific content, but it's a parak that in Yechezkel's kind of language, and we'll try and remember what that is. We spoke a little bit about it in our episode with Dr. Tova Gonzel, this is kind of as redemptive and as comforting as Yechezkel gets. So we have this chapter that can kind of be divided into two parts, but why don't I just sketch out sort of a basic sense of what happens in it, and then I want to hear really your thoughts on some of, I think, the central points that come up in it. So just from like, if we can even call it a plot, because it's not a plot, but even in this prophecy, we start with a call to the hills of Israel. Now, this is a direct connection to the previous parak, because the previous parak was calling to the hills of Edom. That often happens. We know also in Hazinu that there's this kind of prophetic formulation of let the earth be the witness, right? And so we're calling to the hills, but really it's sort of a metonymy. It's a representation for the people themselves. Okay, so God is calling through Yechezkel, obviously, is calling to Harei Yisrael, and what is he saying? And this is again the comfort to say that the other nations, again, maybe specifically Edom, they looked at this land and thought it was going to be for them a morasha. It was going to be their inheritance. Because why? Because you've been exiled. And since you've been exiled, they assumed, okay, great, now more land left for us. By the way, I always give a little smile. I have a daughter named Morasha, and it's for this one of these reasons. Okay, shout out to that amazing young little girl. Okay, and so it says that Sha'af etchem misaviv liyotchem morasha l'she'erit hagoyim v'ta'alu al svat lashon v'dibat am. And he says, you wanted to claim it for yourselves, you other nations. Lachen harei Yisrael shim'u devar Adonai Hashem, כה אמר Adonai Hashem להרים ולגבעות ולאפיקים ולגאיות ולחרבות השוממות. He's calling in to all of these, right, the hills and the ravines and all that's there, that you have been a lilag, you have been a source of mockery. But again, the implication is, and then he goes more into this, is that you in fact will be saved, meaning this land is going to be forever yours. It will not, they're wrong, they're not going to inherit this land. And that's like the first piece that comes out in the Haftorah.
I think that when you read Parak Lamed Vav on its own, and not in the context of the entire Sefer Yechezkel, where you have like a whole holding on like what exactly the theology is or what exactly we're meant to take from that.
Yeah.
I do think that the messages in this parak can be confusing.
Yeah.
What is the message in terms of our responsibility? Do we have a responsibility? Do things happen for a reason? Do they not happen for a reason? And it doesn't give over a very one direct message from, as the narrative of the entire parak. So it changes, and like you're reading it, you're like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to think. Oh, wait, no, it's actually something else. So I just I'll comfort any of those who are learning Parshat Para or Sefer Yechezkel, not Parshat Para, but Yechezkel Lamed Vav for the first time or with renewed vision, that there's something challenging, but also something fascinating about the fact that there are different approaches within one voice, within one nevuah about what not what our role is in the world, but how do we bring about the redemption, and does man even have room to bring about the redemption? So and there's a lot of credit, I think, in the first part when he talks to the goyim about like what they've done and to their emotions, and I think we have it in Pasuk Zayin, that you had a certain reaction and you had a certain thought and emotion, and because you had that emotion of joy over Bnei Israel's destruction or over Bnei Israel's doom, and then God is punishing them for an emotion, meaning yes, for their actions, but there's something deeper than that, and there's something that's beyond that, which is how did you react to it, like the Simcha Laid kind of thing, which also comes up in the second half, that the idea of we'll talk about that when we get there, about the Leiv Chadash that God gives us, that He replaces the Leiv Evan with. So I actually enjoyed that part, that the rejoicing of the enemies and what happened to us is part of the punishment that they, not only part of their punishment, but it's part of our redemption. Meaning because this happened, V'atem Harei Yisrael, and therefore you will flourish and you will be as a response to that.
I think that part of what you're pointing to, the reason why this is confusing, is because Yechezkel isn't a classic prophet of comfort. He doesn't speak in ways that necessarily initially make you realize that that's what he's trying to do. And so in the beginning, we're supposed to be comforted because there's going to be, right, they're going to get what they deserve, right? Because they were happy at our downfall, or right, because they tried to claim what was ours as theirs, that in itself is supposed to be the comfort. But it's not so clear always from his language that that's what it is. And the other reason also is because Yechezkel, in the same moment where he is quote unquote comforting us, there also seems to be condemnation of Am Yisrael.
I think one of the interesting, when we talk about the different messages or what we're supposed to understand from the way that God interacts with both us and both the nations of the world. And this is something that Rav Bazak points out, and it's fascinating because when I read the book, or when I read the parak the first time, I didn't notice it. But when you read it the way that he reads it, that the word Ya'an, which means as a result of, or because you did this, right? So we have in Pasuk Bet, Ko Amar Hashem, Ya'an Amar Ha'oyev Alechem Ha'achu B'mot Olam L'Morsha, then Pasuk Gimel, Lachen Hinabe, right? So Ya'an, because this happened, V'lachen, this is the result. And this repeats itself 2 or 3 times in this Nivuah to the Goyim, which implies in the most direct way possible that your actions that there's cause and effect, that there's action and responsibility, that there's a result for what you did. And that's a very black and white logic, right? That's a very, there's no wiggle room there. But it's how does God interact with the Goyim? There's this vilachen, and therefore because this happened. But it's not only directed at the Goyim, right? It's not only directed at the Goyim. We have it appears in Pasuk Vav, Lachen hine be'al admat Yisrael, and in Pasuk Zayin, Lachen ko amar Hashem, ani nasati et yadi im lo agom asher lechem misaviv hem kamotam yiso. But the direct result of that is in Pasuk Chet, which is Ve'atem harei Yisrael and vechem titenu perchem tisulam Yisrael ki karvu levot. Maybe one of the more famous psukim from this reading or from this parak. That yes, it's not directed at us, but we are part of that. Meaning we get like grandfathered into that velachen. That because they acted a certain way, our rebuilding, our flourishing, our anvechem titenu is sort of a punishment to them. Right, the fact that we can emerge, and to me, that's like a very interesting thing, right? That because they acted a certain way, not only are they punished, but we get rewarded.
Yeah, well, I think it connects to a broader theology in Yechezkel, which is that it's not because of our merit. Now, he says that more directly in the second half, right? In the second half, it says not only is it not about our merit, but just as an example in Kaf Bet, Lechen emor leveit Yisrael, ko amar Hashem, lo lema'anchem ani oseh beit Yisrael, ki l'shem kodshi, asher chilaltem bogoyim ater ba'atem sham. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because my name was essentially violated by you among the goyim. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I just want to go back to your point from earlier on, which is this idea that Yechezkel is reading the theology of the times based on the way that most did, which is that if the Beit Mikdash was destroyed, then we are not deserving. And remember, it's a fresh event right now. We are not deserving of something. There will be a redemption. God has shown me that there'll be a redemption, but it must be for other reasons. And so this piece about, well, we're going to flourish because they're getting punished, to me connects back into this piece about we're going to flourish, not because we deserve to flourish right now, but because it's part of like the broader, bigger plan.
Which is also challenging because the whole idea of like
totally challenging.
Because that idea, I always when I think about it, it's like something that is so frightening and something that is so healing. To know that like no matter where frightening in the sense that like it doesn't matter how good I am or what I do, that this is going to happen or not going to happen.
Yeah.
Or healing and comforting in the fact that no matter how far I go or how low I sink, that God has a different plan for me. But I think what makes it challenging is that like there are direct reasons given for why the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, right? Where it's pointed out, everybody can quote it, but then we're saying like there's a direct reason for the sin, but the rebuilding may not be a direct correlation to your actions.
Yeah.
And it almost feels, or not almost, it really feels that when it comes to the individual, there's room for being judged by your actions, and there's room for, I don't want to say it like it sounds like a little musari, like hishtadlos, and there's room for like what you do. Mm-hmm. But as a nation, sometimes there's I don't want to say gzar din, but there's a overall din that comes to the world. And I think that if I move away from this tragedy, of any tragedy that's happened to the Jewish people, we say like if you look at the individuals, why do they have to suffer? But it seems like the door itself was given a gzar din that this is what's happened to the generations. There's something empowering and overwhelming about the fact that we live our lives as individuals, but as part of that bigger picture all the time.
Wait, I want to probe that more because I want to fill in another piece by Yechezkel, because Yechezkel famously has 4 sections in the book that probe what's called Torah Tagmul, right? Basically, why do bad things happen to good people, etc. That the people were walking around with the belief that they were basically paying for the sins of their fathers. And it wasn't a crazy thing to think that. There were other prophets who said very different things. But Yechezkel, imparts to them time after time throughout the book that they are individually responsible for their sins. But you're adding another level. You're saying that, yes, so we also still today live in a world where we think that there's individual responsibility, but maybe there's another parallel system of judgment that happens for a broader nation, right? I even just said this yesterday in a class of mine that I was teaching. Again, we don't really want to go into theology of the Holocaust, and I don't want to talk about the Holocaust. I know you do because you're a Holocaust expert, but I'm not.
Not expert.
But this piece about sometimes, as you said, there's a gzar din for the generation, and individuals can fall into that judgment, even if they themselves may not have personally deserved it, right? There's a lot that's being asked here, and it's important because we need to imagine Yechezkel as somebody who just watched the Shoah happened in Europe, and he's living in America right now, and so he is very importantly starting to think about, well, wait a minute, how does this look? How does God actually run the world? And so we're seeing a little bit of it in this parak here as well, when he says it's not about your individual merits. You don't have any. You're the generation that because of you, the Mikdash was destroyed. So he's looking at them and saying, God's not going to make things better in the future because of you. He's going to make it better because for many other reasons, for his name, because the other nations did things that are bad, right? So there's a whole other way of looking at all of this, and it connects to the way he looks at the other nations.
And I'll be honest with you, I struggle with this. I struggle with this when it comes to whatever, again, name the tragedy, October 7th, the Holocaust. Well, why did that happen?
Yeah.
I don't like those conversations, and I don't think that's our responsibility. But when you talk about concepts of the Mikdash, it's very clear why things happened, right? It gives you, back in the day we gave theology and we were offered theological responses to that, but we don't do that. We don't do that today. So when you say it's interesting to think of Yechezkel at that time offering, I would probably be irritated also if I heard him.
Yeah. Also, though, remember that the people he's speaking to didn't actually experience the Churban. They heard about it. They heard about it secondhand. So again, I think I'm taking this from Tova Gonzel. I don't remember if because I spoke about or because I read her books, but it's sort of this piece about how somebody who was, Yirmiyahu was traumatized by the Churban. He saw it happen. Yechezkel wasn't. And so he can take a much harsher stance. He can be sort of almost more intellectualized about it and then say, okay, moving forward, restoration, we're moving there. Yirmiyahu wouldn't have been necessarily, he has a few prakim of Nechama, but Yechezkel, the one who didn't see that whole thing crumble in front of his eyes, is the one who was able to look ahead and say, okay, that's what we're heading towards. We're heading towards something else very different in the future.
But Dafka, that piece of where they show up in Jewish history is so significant because it take it away from where they are to where we are today. That there are different approaches and there are different times that we feel different things and there are different times where we experience, I feel like God is interacting with me or with my generation in this way or that way. And that's why I looked at this parak, and again, when I read it so many times, and I was like, this actually, I find a much stronger message for our generation today. Of there are some things that you can't question, and there are some things which brings us to the next, the idea in general of Tuman Tahara. And there are some punishments and some generations that we're not meant to question or that we're not meant to understand. And God does it, he says, find the pasuk about to prevent the Chil Hashem. So to prevent the Chil Hashem, who's responsible for that? Am I responsible for that because I caused the Chil Hashem? Or is Hashem doing something having nothing to do with me because he doesn't want to do a Chil Hashem? Yeah. Do I think about God's cheshbon or my cheshbon? And when Yechezkel goes into that, there's something frustrating about that where he says, Lo l'manchem. What do you mean, Lo l'manchem? I can get up in the morning and do chesed all day and it's still lo l'ma'ani. No, when God decides that there's a Chil Hashem, then the punishment is there. And so it does take away that individual responsibility. But I think when moving it again back to where we are, then when there's that bigger picture, you say, okay, there's only so much that a man can do, right? There's the balance between empowering man and humbling man is the spectrum that we all live on, of how much of what I do has an effect and how much of what I do doesn't, not that it doesn't matter, but that God runs the world because he is the God and we are not. Yeah,
and I think I also want to throw something out into that, which is another theological complication, which is that there are many, and this is more of a modern way of thinking, but God can also change the way he runs the world, meaning the Hanhaga of Hashem doesn't always stay the same. And let's say there were many theologies that were suggested like that post-Holocaust, when only 15, 20 years later, when people started writing about theology on this, because for a while everyone was just in shock. But But that's also a possibility, meaning the fact that Yechezkel speaks about the fact that, well, I'm going to redeem you not because you deserve it, but because my name is being desecrated. By the way, why is my name being desecrated? Just also fill in that piece. Because in the ancient world, if the nation of a god, right, that the god was associated with us, and we're, this downtrodden, destroyed people, so they look back and say, oh, that god, what does he have, or how powerful is he? And so it's taking like an ancient Near Eastern idea, but then importing it into the way that the Torah functions, meaning it's God with a capital G. We don't really think that like something is missing in God, but that the people around us, the nations around us, are looking at us and saying, oh, look at that forsaken nation. But can we just jump into this, the Mayim Tu'urim, right? Again, this is in the second.
You're not even jumping into it. You are already in there, because that's what you're saying. Something that I learned from Rav Chagai London, where that the concept of Tahara is sort of out of God's immediate universe. That God created a mechanism that is not that has like a different element to it, because the idea of Tahara is so unusual, which I do want to talk about in a second. But that God, not only does God change the way He interacts with the world, God created within His world the ability for things to happen that break the rules or that change the rules. I can just throw water on you and suddenly you're pure. You can just go into the water and suddenly you become pure. Like, what does that even mean? But the beauty in that God can break His own rules.
Yeah, I just want to remind everyone of the pasuk here, in pasuk Kafei. וזרקתי עליכם מים טהורים, וטיהרתם מכל טומאותיכם ומכל גלוליכם אטהר אתכם. Now I just want to also say, right, He's going to throw this water on us, this purified water, and we will become purified from all of the, I would say, the filth and the impurities that have tainted us. But this also speaks to other prakim earlier on in the book, where it was dafka prophecies of destruction, where we were speaking about the way that the two sisters, we'll just leave it at that, it's earlier in the first half of the book, that they defiled themselves. This is kind of like the positive spin on that, and they're referring to the two kingdoms as the two sisters. But yeah, so why don't we go deeper into that? Meaning, so you're saying on one idea that the Tahara is a way that God imbues this world with an ability to sort of change itself. Like we have an ability to go outside the rules and recreate who we are.
But the idea of Tahara, again, if you bring it back to Pasuk Tetzayin, which is where the Parshat Para starts for the Sephardi community, right? That's what he said. Vayidvar Hashem elei lemor ben adam beit Yisrael yoshim ad matam vayitamu otam b'darkam uba'alilotam kitumat hanida vaytam darkam lefanai. There is no more word that implies that connects the word Tahara or Tuma than the word Nida. Right, the word nida, which is such a sensitive word, and it implies total distance and total richuk. Right, when there is someone who is a nida, there's no coming close. So on the one hand, you feel very distant. On the other hand, nida is always a temporary state.
Yeah.
So there's this push and pull in this pasuk where I feel like when we were told that we are like we have to tumat nida, we're like sent to the other, bichutz lamachane. We're not. There's no accessibility. There's no connection. There's no physical closeness between us. On the other hand, nida is not an eternal state of being.
Yeah.
So there's also that comfort that this is going to end at some point. And where does this end? It ends with v'zarakti alecha mayim torim v'tihartem, and there's like this duality here. V'zarakti alechem v'tihartem. Right. I'm going to throw you in the water, or I'm going to put the water, and then your job is v'tihartem. Right. We both have this responsibility. It's man's and it's God's. And the beauty of water as being metaher, or the idea of tahara. You want to take it back to like Parshat Para of Parshat Chukah.
Yeah.
So Zot Chukat Torah, right? This is the Haftorah of Parshat Para, which is if there's any parsha that exemplifies what the idea of chok, that which you are not only is it a chok that you don't understand, that you don't
goes against its own rules.
Goes against its own rules. You cannot mehar hair, right? You cannot, says Rashi, don't I don't want you to ask about it, right? When something is a chok, it's a chok. It's not something that we're meant to sit and discuss. Why is it there? What? So you could say the easy ones are like shatnas and all that kind of thing that you don't delve into, you don't try to understand. But I'm going to bring back some of my Holocaust heifer. The Eish Kodesh, the Piaseczny Rebbe, who was writing in a difficult time. He was writing during the time of the darkness of the Warsaw Ghetto. When he writes one of his last pieces, when he writes about Parshat Chukat, he says there's two aspects there. There's the chok itself, and then there's the second piece, is Ein Lecha Reshut Lahar Her, meaning you don't, that it's not that only God gave us a chok, but you have a responsibility to accept that chok. You have a responsibility to not question that chok. So there's this duality of when we say when we say the way that Rav Chagai London looks at it, that the chok or that the tahara is something that God gives us, and we're not really connected to it. God gives us the chok, God gives us tahara, and that's the way that He runs the world. But the Ish Kodesh and Rav Klonimus Kalman Shapira says that when Rashi adds "En lecha reshut laharher," that's part of the chok, that you don't question it, which is not the way that you and I like to think about things, because we love questioning. Mm-hmm. But maybe there's a beauty in that, which is that I am part of that process. When I accept it, and then he goes into this very long thing about when a person goes into the mikveh, they immerse in their full body. And that's what it means to accept the chok, to totally accept it intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, religiously.
Just immerse in it.
Immerse in it.
Be inside of it.
And be inside of it. Mm-hmm. And like we've said before, that there is something comforting about it, right? Don't ask, because I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah.
Right. So if I'm not going to tell you, then you don't have that process of trying to figure out what did God say in Parak Lamed Vav. Maybe that is part of the idea of when God says "V'zaraktecha mayim toharim v'tihartem," that here's a gift, and the same way you don't question the chok, you also don't question the tahara. That there is beauty in the world that is unexplainable, and there's purification in the world that is unexplainable. And the other side of that coin is that there is chok in this world that is unexplainable, and darkness in the world that is unexplainable. But we have both. Mm-hmm. Can one, in any way possible, convey the beauty and the blessings that we have in the world? Are we deserving of that? Maybe not. So the same thing same thing. It's a painful reality. It's an uncomfortable truth. But the same way we don't deserve so much of the blessings that we have, we don't also deserve some of the darkness that comes to us through the world of chok and Parshat Para Duma. That not only am I going to tell you what it's about, I'm asking you not to ask me about it. This is just what it is.
Another piece I think that also comes up in the Haftorah that connects to like this otherworldly, we're changing things without there being a direct, like rational explanation for it, which again to me is the theology, and also as you're explaining the concept of Tuman Tahara itself, is also there's a very beautiful reference to Gan Eden in this parak, and it's in Pasuk Lamed Hey, verse 35. Ve'amru ha'aretz hayta kegan Eden v'ha'arim v'ha'charivot v'neshamot v'ne'erasot b'tzurot yashavu. That we have a description that also the goyim will know, right? They're going to know Sha'ani Hashem Baniti, that this is what I have reestablished, and essentially Eretz Yisrael is going to return to being a Gan Eden. Now, this is interesting. It's interesting within the book of Yechezkel, and it's interesting sort of broader wholesale in Tanakh. Sure. Within the book of Yechezkel, this is the third time that Gan Eden is referenced. The first two times are in prophecies of destruction to Tzor and Sidon, and there the phrase of Gan Eden is used derogatorily to describe sort of like a waste of resources. But here we have the idea that Eretz Yisrael is going to go back to being this Gan Eden, which to me also connects to like that almost irrational space, meaning it's like again a description of a perfection essentially. But here it's describing Eretz Yisrael. In the broader sense, Gan Eden does get mentioned. It gets mentioned a bit in Yeshayahu and Parak Nun Aleph, and it gets mentioned in Sefer Yoel. And when Gan Eden is mentioned in those places, so just for example, in the case of Yeshayahu, Ki nicham Hashem et Zion, nicham et kol chavotea, vayasem midbara ke'eden, right? So here we have, it's again a very, very clear verse of comfort that Zion will be comforted, and essentially her midbar will become an Eden, meaning the desolate places will become flourishing. Ve'et orvota ki gan Hashem, sason v'simcha yimatzeva, toda v'kol zimra. Okay, so again, it's going to be a place of happiness and of joy. And again, these desolate places, the Arava, will become a Gan Hashem. And Gan Eden gets used as like kind of this way where Eretz Yisrael will get revamped essentially. We don't have so many references to it in the Torah other than the expulsion from it, and then a little bit of a reference when we talk about Mitzrayim being like a Gan Hashem in Dvarim. But we do see that the prophets speak a little bit more about it. And again, to me, it connects to like this irrationality piece of there's going to be this complete revival, and Eretz Yisrael will feel like a Gan Eden, that everything is there and available to you. And again, we know that Eretz Yisrael b'mahut is supposed to be a place you have to work hard for, and boy, do we know that. And that really describes the existence here. But I think that this piece is also, again, this is part of like, as you're saying, it's like the complexity of the way that Yechezkel comforts. There's something that at first glance may seem, oh, that's beautiful. And then when you think about it again, you're like, wait, that's actually complicated. That's a very complicated way of looking at the world. You know what I'm saying? And I think that fits into it.
No, and I love that. I love that things are not so straightforward. That nothing, with every beauty, there's some pain. And with every pain, there's also some aspect of beauty. And I agree with you that on the one hand, Gan Eden implies perfection. But I also think the concept of Gan Eden implies new, fresh, like hasn't been touched, hasn't been entered. So when he says, Gan Eden here, and it was surprising to see it when we talked about, when you pointed it out. But if I go back to the comfort of Pasuk Kavav, v'natati lechem lev chadash v'ruach chadasha etein bekerbechem, that
of course it's the ruach chadasha, another reference to Gan Eden, by the way.
Oh, yes. But the idea of you can start fresh, and you can start new. And Gan Eden is not only a physical place of like mystery and wonder and like beauty, but it was a new creation. And that when you immerse from the Mayim Torim, there's a new creation. And when God says V'natati lechem lev chadash, that sometimes we need a renewal, and sometimes we need to have a lev chadash. And that lev chadash is not, I don't know if this is the exact kavanah of the Navi, because I'm going to go a little Hasidic here. I don't know if that lev chadash is like a chronological thing, that at some point in history we all get a lev chadash.
Yeah.
But if we, then Torah Rabbi Nachman talks about that you can get a new start, throughout the day. You can start many different times throughout the day, that it's never doomed and it's never over. That whether that nida time is, whatever, it's 2 weeks, or whether it's 1 day or 3 hours or 5 years, that there is a time of distance, but there is the possibility of return, and the possibility of renewal of self, renewal of commitment is there. And sometimes that results in comfort, and sometimes that results in God blessing you, and sometimes it doesn't. Because when God runs the world in a way of Chilul Hashem or Chok, then it's almost irrelevant what we do.
Mm-hmm. No, but I think that's why Yechezkel digs deep into images that have little to do with rationality, because again, he's going with this idea that you sinned, you don't deserve it. And so however God's going to save the world in the future and save Am Yisrael is going to be through a way that's like semi-miraculous, meaning, but what you're saying, the comfort is that exists in the world, meaning it's comforting to know that even though I don't deserve it, I could receive a second chance at something.
1,000%.
Right? And so it's saying that, well, on one hand, I'm responsible for my behavior and actions. On the other hand, there exist systems in the world, Yechezkel is telling me, that can overcome that cause and effect relationship.
Parshat Para, when we read it in the calendar, where it falls in the calendar, it comes immediately before Parshat Chodesh. It comes in the Parsha. Its role is that it's the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh, meaning you can't separate between them. Mm-hmm. We have Shkalim, we have Zachor, that there's a week break, and we have another week break, and then we have Para and Chodesh, that in their mahut, in their essence, they are connected, and you can't separate between them. And there, I think, is also that beauty, that the minute that you don't have to wait to be mitchadesh. It's right there. It's present. It's the next day. There's no separation between the idea of chok and the idea of starting again, or sanctifying, or learning to sanctify time and changing your ways. So I think that's a beautiful piece that we're not there now. We'll be there when this episode airs. That right now when it's happening, we're in the middle of that. We're being purified, and then it's Parshat Chodesh. Let's start again. Mm-hmm. And if, with your permission,
yes.
I will add that this time of year, we are a week before the 26th day of Adar, which is the Yahrzeit of Sarah Schneer, the woman that we consider today responsible, single-handedly, even though she probably didn't know it at the time, for the creation of a system for women to learn Torah. Women always learn Torah. Women always love Torah, but she created a system for that to happen, and she was not blessed to have children. So I do feel that it's so important to mention on her Yahrzeit and before her Yahrzeit, meaning that her Yahrzeit is coming up, especially in a place like Matan, which is such a Kiddush Hashem of the idea of women learning Torah together, women living Torah together, loving Torah together, learning Torah together. And I'll just add about this that. Her student, Pearl Banish, when she talks about what she remembers from Sarah Schneer, and Pearl Banish was in Auschwitz, and in her darkest days she said, I couldn't remember anything I learned. I lost all my Torah. The only thing I remembered was Sarah Schneer loved singing the song V'Tahara Libeinu L'Avdecha Be'emet. And that's what they sang in Auschwitz to keep them going. And what a beautiful thing to talk about her here, to talk about Tahara, that it makes no sense that that's what they sing. How could they sing that song over there? Yeah. But no matter what's happening to you, no matter what's happening in the world around you, that a Jew prays V'Tahara Libeinu, that the events that are happening, again, Shalom Nida, what they were going through. Yeah. But that ability to say, okay, we can emerge from this This is part of our world that we don't understand. But the same way we don't understand the pain of Auschwitz, we also don't understand the ability, Be'ezrat Hashem, one day to have that purification of soul. And when they emerged, and many of our students survived, and they recreated Torah and recreated that ability for Tahara, was to learn Torah together and from a place of Tahara. What a zchut for her neshama and for everyone listening.
Michal Porat, thank you so much for coming again.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you for the challenge of delving into Sefer Yechezkel and trying to sort of connect it to where we are today and to what we're going through today. And hopefully it should be a good Parshat Para and a good Parshat Chodesh for all of us.
Amen. Thanks for listening to this week's episode from Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study. If you would like to sponsor an episode, please contact the Matan office or email me at podcast@matan.org.il. Please do us and all women's Torah learning a favor and share this episode with all of your friends and family.